He never expected wearing his favorite jersey would make him a target. Day after day, the bullying got worse. Shoved in the hallways, laughed at, humiliated. But just when he was about to give up, something unbelievable happened. The next day at school, the entire cafeteria went silent, because standing at the door was Travis Kelce. And what he did next left everyone in shock. Jason gripped the straps of his backpack tighter as he walked through the crowded school hallways, trying to shrink into himself. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed softly, their harsh glow making everything feel even more exposed. Lockers slammed shut, bursts of laughter echoed from different corners, and the casual chatter of students filled the space. But Jason wasn't focused on any of that. He was focused on making it to class without being noticed. His red and gold Chiefs jersey clung to his frame like a second skin. But today it felt heavier than usual. It wasn't just fabric. It was a symbol of everything he loved. Everything that made him feel connected to his grandfather, the man who had taught him to love the game. But lately, it had become something else. A reason for them to single him out. He could feel the stares before he heard the voices. "Look who's still wearing that ugly jersey," a voice sneered from behind him. Jason kept walking. He had learned that reacting only made things worse. "Must be nice to live in your little fantasy world," another voice joined in. "Thinking Kelce would ever care about some loser like you." The words were sharp, but it was the laughter that followed that stung the most. Jason's jaw clenched as he felt the heat rise in his face. He tried to remind himself that they were just words, that they didn't matter. But the weight in his chest told a different story. A sudden force from the side knocked his backpack off his shoulder, sending it tumbling to the floor. His books spilled out, papers scattering across the tile like fallen leaves. Jason froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Students slowed down, some whispering, others watching in silence, waiting to see what would happen next. He bent down quickly, reaching for his things, but before he could grab his notebook, a foot slammed down on it. He looked up. The boy staring down at him wore a smirk that made Jason's stomach twist. "You really think this jersey makes you special?" the boy asked, nudging the fabric with his shoe. "You think it means anything?" Jason stayed silent. His fingers curled into fists at his sides, but he didn't move. He had learned this game well enough to know there was no winning. The boy laughed under his breath, then reached down and yanked at Jason's jersey, pulling it over his head in one swift motion. Jason stumbled slightly, the sudden exposure making his skin crawl. The crowd around them erupted into snickers and hushed giggles. The jersey, the one he had worn with so much pride, landed on the dirty floor of the hallway. Jason stared at it for a moment, something inside him breaking just a little more. He swallowed the lump in his throat and reached for it. But before he could grab it, another boy kicked it down the hall. More laughter, more whispers. Jason didn't look up, didn't say a word. He simply picked up his jersey, gripping it so tightly his knuckles turned white, and shoved it into his backpack. Then, with his head down and his heart heavy, he walked away. The hallway felt colder than usual, the hum of conversations blending into an indistinct murmur as Jason kept his head down, moving quickly through the crowd. He had mastered the art of being invisible, walking close to the lockers, shoulders slightly hunched, avoiding eye contact. Maybe today would be different. Maybe they'd just ignore him. But he felt it before it even happened. The shift in the air, the hush of laughter just before a storm. "Hey, Chiefs boy!" The voice was sharp, laced with amusement, and Jason's stomach dropped. He didn't respond. His fingers tightened around his backpack straps, his grip so firm that his knuckles turned white. He just needed to get to class. Just keep walking. A sudden, rough tug at his jersey stopped him mid-step, yanking him backward slightly. He barely had time to react before another hand grabbed the fabric. "Still think that jersey makes you special?" The voice was closer now, mocking. Jason clenched his jaw, refusing to look up. If he didn't engage, maybe they'd get bored. But they weren't in the mood to be ignored. A stronger pull this time, sharp, aggressive. Jason stumbled as the jersey was yanked over his head, leaving him exposed in just his undershirt. A chill ran through him, though it had nothing to do with the temperature. The laughter hit immediately, loud, cruel, echoing through the hallway. His jersey, a jersey he had worn proudly, a jersey that meant something, lay crumpled on the floor. Before he could reach for it, a foot kicked it down the hall, sending it sliding across the tiles further and further away. Jason stood frozen. He could feel eyes on him, whispers mixing with laughter. Some students were recording, others just watching. A few looked uncomfortable but said nothing. No one stepped in. His throat burned, but he refused to let the tears fall. Slowly, he walked forward, his steps heavy, his pulse pounding in his ears. Each movement felt like wading through quicksand. He bent down, picking up the jersey with careful hands, brushing off the dust like it mattered, like it would erase what had just happened. He didn't look up. He didn't say a word. Just turned, stuffed the jersey into his backpack, zipped it shut, and walked away. No one stopped him. No one said a thing. But as he moved down the hallway, the weight in his chest was suffocating. That night, as he sat in his dimly lit room, staring at the jersey on his bed, he wondered if he'd ever wear it again. The cafeteria buzzed with the usual noise, laughter, trays clattering, the occasional shout from across the room. Jason sat in his usual spot, near the far wall, where no one really paid attention to him. His head was down, eyes fixed on the untouched food in front of him. He wasn't hungry. Not after the last few days. The weight of his hoodie felt different today. It wasn't warmth. It was armor. A layer between him and the world. Between him and the humiliation that still clung to his skin like a bruise that refused to fade. He had convinced himself that today would be normal. That without the jersey, he would be invisible. And for the most part, he was right. No one had tripped him. No whispered insults followed him through the hallways. He had become just another face in the crowd. Exactly what he thought he wanted. But then, something shifted. A strange, almost unnatural silence rippled through the cafeteria. It wasn't immediate. It moved like a slow wave, starting at one side and spreading across the room. The usual hum of conversations dipped, replaced by scattered whispers, the sound of chairs scraping against the floor as people turned in their seats. Jason felt it before he saw it. The air around him changed, thick with something electric. His fingers curled into his sleeves as he lifted his head, following the direction of everyone's gaze. And then, his breath caught. Standing in the doorway, larger than life, was Travis Kelce. Jason blinked, his stomach twisted, his brain scrambling to process what he was seeing. It couldn't be real. He was hallucinating, or dreaming, or something. But then a phone screen lit up near him, and then another. More whispers. "No way! Dude, that's... What is he doing here?" Jason's heart pounded against his ribs, his breath suddenly too shallow. Kelce wasn't looking around, wasn't acknowledging the teachers who had started moving toward him, their expressions a mix of confusion and awe. He wasn't nodding at the kids who had their phones out, already recording. He was looking straight at Jason. Jason froze. His palms were damp against the table. His mind screamed at him to do something, to react, but he felt trapped in his own body, locked in a moment too big for him to understand. And then Travis Kelce started walking. Each step felt deliberate, purposeful. His chief's jacket stood out like a flame in the dull cafeteria lighting, his presence magnetic, undeniable. The whispers grew louder, but Jason barely heard them. All he could hear was the blood rushing through his ears, the unsteady rhythm of his own breath. Kelce stopped in front of him, towering over the table. For a second, the world seemed to pause, and then, with a small smile, he reached out and placed a hand on Jason's shoulder. "I heard you've got the best Chiefs jersey in town." Jason's throat tightened. The cafeteria was dead silent now, and for the first time in a long time, Jason didn't feel invisible. Jason's fingers hovered just above the fabric, his breath uneven as he stared at the jersey in Kelce's hands. The weight of the moment pressed down on him, heavier than the stairs surrounding them. The cafeteria was frozen, the usual hum of conversation replaced by an eerie silence. Every pair of eyes was locked onto them, the kids who had ignored him, the ones who had laughed, the ones who had torn him down. Kelce didn't move, didn't rush him. He just held the jersey, his expression calm, his presence steady. Jason swallowed hard, his mind racing. Did he deserve this? Was this real? His fingers twitched, hesitating. Kelce turned slightly in their direction, his voice even but firm. "You know what makes a great team?" he asked, his words cutting through the silence. "Lifting each other up, not tearing each other down." Jason's throat tightened. Something shifted in the air. The weight that had been pressing on him for weeks, the humiliation, the doubt, the loneliness. It didn't feel so suffocating anymore. Kelce looked back at him, his voice softer now. "So, what do you say?" Jason exhaled slowly, then reached forward, his fingers finally closing around the fabric. The second he held it, the silence in the room shifted. It wasn't just a jersey. It was a statement, a moment, a promise that he wouldn't fade into the background anymore. Kelce grinned. "Yeah, I thought so." Jason clutched the jersey to his chest, his heartbeat steadying. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't just existing. He was seen. He was heard. And this time, he wasn't afraid to stand tall. That night, Jason lay awake in bed, his phone buzzing with notifications every few seconds. The screen glowed in the dimly lit room, illuminating his face as he scrolled through post after post. His name was everywhere. His face, the moment, the way Travis Kelce had stood up for him in front of the entire school. The cafeteria scene, captured on shaky phone cameras, had exploded across social media. This gave me chills. Kelce is a legend, but this kid? Pure heart. This is what real leadership looks like. Jason blinked, still struggling to believe it. Just yesterday, he had been invisible, a nobody. Now, the entire world seemed to know his name. But it wasn't the likes, the shares, or even the news reports that made his chest tighten with emotion. It was the realization that, for the first time in a long time, he wasn't alone. Morning came faster than he expected. As he stood in front of his mirror, gripping the edges of his jersey, he hesitated. What if things went back to the way they were? What if yesterday was just a moment, not a change? His fingers traced the stitched letters on the back, his name, bold and unshaken. Taking a breath, he pulled it over his head. The walk to school felt different. The air was crisp, the morning sun casting a soft glow on the pavement. The usual pit in his stomach wasn't there. And as he stepped through the doors, the first thing he noticed was the silence. Not the kind that came before mockery, but something else, something unfamiliar. Then, a tap on his shoulder. Jason turned. A kid from his math class, one who had never spoken to him before, gave him a nod. Cool jersey. Jason smiled. Because sometimes, one moment really can change everything. If this story inspired you, hit the like button and share it with someone who believes in standing up for what's right. Subscribe now for more powerful stories that remind us how a single act of kindness can change everything.